Thank you very much, Deirdre, for that introduction and also for being such a supporter of our organization, being the vice chair of our European Alzheimer's Alliance. It has really been a privilege working with you, and we look forward to finishing the mandate with you. And I have to say, on behalf of all of us, we're all a bit sad to hear that you will not be standing again for another mandate, because we would have very much looked forward to continuing that great collaboration for at least another 5 years. So what I'm here today, though, is to present our European Dementia Monitor, and just to give you a kind of bit of context about this exercise. So it's, as Deirdre already mentioned, we want to benchmark national policies. It allows us to rank countries and systems to determine which countries are the most developed, are the most supportive of people with dementia. Also, Deirdre mentioned that this is the third time that we're doing this exercise. So this is something that we would like to repeat on a regular basis so that we can see how countries have evolved over time. Have they improved the support that they are providing to people with dementia and their carers, or are they going down in that kind of support? For us, it's a fantastic lobbying tool because we can use this to present to members of the European Parliament to show them how their country compares to other European countries. But it's a fantastic lobbying tool for national Alzheimer's organizations, because they can go to their government and say, look, in this field, we seem to be ranking 17th, whereas our neighboring country is ranking first or second. What do we need to do to improve the situation for our country and for people with dementia living in our country? So the 10 areas that we looked at are care aspects, medical and research aspects, policy issues, human rights, legal and social aspects, and I'm going to go into detail for each one of those 10 fields. Also, we've been able to then rank all countries according to the global average that they have received. So each one of those 10 areas is contributing 10% to the overall score of a country. So the first area that we looked at was availability of care services. Also, what I need to highlight is that we are working very closely with our national member organizations. So they helped us define the areas that we should be looking at. They also provided the answers to all the areas that we were looking at. So maybe there's also a caveat for some of the findings that we will be presenting is these are the opinions of the national Alzheimer's organizations in all the countries that we are looking at. This may not be the opinion of the national governments. This may not be the opinions of national policymakers. These are very clearly, on some aspects, the opinions and views of the national Alzheimer's organizations. So, for example, on the field of availability of care services, that's a very subjective view, because we looked at 10 different services. So we looked at adaptations to the home, Alzheimer cafes, care coordination and case management, carer training, daycare, home care, respite care at home. We looked at support groups for carers, support groups for people with dementia, and last but not least, we also looked at residential and nursing home care. And then we asked our member organizations, do you feel that in your country, these services are sufficiently available? Are they insufficiently available, or they are actually absent in your country? So just to let you know as well, we looked at 37 European countries. So in an ideal world, we would have, for all of these services, 37 countries saying yes, these services are available in the majority of cases and are sufficiently available. You can see that we are very far from that 37 mark. The highest service that is available the most are support groups for carers, but in the field of care coordination, so a person has received a diagnosis of dementia, they're looking for all the services that might be available. We would like each person with dementia after diagnosis to get a case manager or care coordinator. Only one country said that that's a service that is sufficiently available in their country, whereas 36 European countries said that there's more efforts that need to be done in this field. And the best was support groups for carers, where 11 countries felt that these were services that were sufficiently available in their countries. So these are a number of maps that we will be showing. And this is, although it's members of the European Parliament that are here, we're not making a political statement by saying that green is positive and blue is negative. We use the colors of Alzheimer Europe, and basically we use green. The greener a country is, the more developed and the more supportive of people with dementia it is, and the more darker blue a country is, the less supportive of people with dementia the country is. So when it comes to the ranking of countries on the availability of care services, you can see that, for example, Luxembourg and Norway are the countries where the associations felt that most of these services were available. And Bulgaria was really the country where the association felt that very few of these services, which are vital for people with dementia, were actually available for people with dementia and their carers. You will also, of course, have the report on your desks, so you can, or on your desks, on your tables, so you can also look at the detailed findings and really look for each one of these statistics, how your country compares to others. We then also ask, well, it's not just whether a service is available and whether it's sufficiently available to people. It's also a question, is it actually possible for people to access these services because they are affordable? So we wanted to understand, for the same range of services, are these services typically funded by the national health system in the country? Are they partly funded? Or will people actually have to fund access to these services themselves? Or again, are these services that are currently absent? Here, the picture is slightly better. So we looked at, again, 37 countries. In residential and nursing home care, 36 out of those 37 countries said that there's some degree of funding and reimbursement for people to be able to access these services. And the service that was the least available and affordable were Alzheimer cafes, and then below that were support groups for people with dementia and support groups for carers, where there was less financial support from governments for people with dementia and carers to participate and access these services. Again, when we're looking at the map, and it's a very striking map because you can see that very clearly in Northern Europe and especially Scandinavian countries, Scandinavian or Nordic countries have a very different funding models for a lot of these services, because in Norway and Denmark, access to a lot of these services, when they are available, will at least also be funded by the state. And this is followed by other countries like Sweden, by Finland, Estonia, and also Scotland. Again, a lot of the countries in Southeastern Europe, there will be a lot less access to these services. And you can see, for example, countries like Turkey, Cyprus, Israel, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Serbia, were countries where very few of these services are actually affordable for people to access them. When we're looking at treatment and medical interventions, so this time we looked at the currently available treatments that exist for people with dementia. So these are the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors and memantine. These are the 4 drugs that are currently authorized in most European countries for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. There's also combination therapy where you mix one of the acetylcholinesterase inhibitors with memantine. And that was also something that we had done and studied in previous editions of our European Dementia Monitor. We wanted to understand, are these pretty much fully reimbursed? Are they partly reimbursed? Or they're not reimbursed or not even available at all? We expanded the list of treatments because we also wanted to look at, for example, medical food. Is it reimbursed, partly reimbursed, or not reimbursed at all? And the medical food we looked at was Fortisyn Connect. We looked at amyloid imaging because we want to promote a biomarker-based diagnosis to make sure that people actually have Alzheimer's disease. So we wanted to understand, is amyloid imaging reimbursed as part of the diagnostic process, yes or no? And then another support that is very important for people, especially in the more advanced cases of dementia, is there support for incontinence help, and is that supported by the families themselves, or is there some degree of support by the governments? Here again, so we looked at 37 European countries. You will see that in the majority of cases, the current treatments are actually being reimbursed, although there's still a range of countries where that is not the case. The one that is the least reimbursed is actually galantamine, and then memantine. And what's interesting as well, incontinence health, for example, was reimbursed to some degree in at least 32 of those studied European countries. Combination therapy, so combining an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor with memantine, was one of the areas that wasn't as reimbursed as some of the others. You can see that amyloid imaging, so if you really want to make sure that somebody has the underlying pathology in their brain, that would potentially, well, number one, that will tell us that they have Alzheimer's disease, and number two, that we should get access to future anti-amyloid treatments. Only 18 of those countries actually reimbursed amyloid imaging. And you can see that for medical food, for Fortescue Connect, only one country, that was Sweden, where on a pilot basis that medical nutrition was covered by the reimbursement system. So when we look at European countries, we also looked at, on the one hand, we want people to give access to those medicines that are prescribed and authorized for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, but we also want to have countries to have processes in place to make sure that we don't overprescribe medicines like antipsychotics, which have been shown to be deleterious for the health of people with Alzheimer's disease. So we want to understand, for example, well, does your country have a strategy to make sure that we reduce the number of people in residential homes and other places that still get these antipsychotic medicines? And you can see that there's not that many countries that have these strategies in place. It's again mostly Western European countries, the UK, Ireland, Iceland, and then also Sweden, Finland, and also Turkey as the outlier in these countries. The next question we asked again around the whole issue of treatment was, we all know that the EMA is currently looking at the marketing authorization for new disease-modifying treatments. We know that the EMA will potentially make a decision on these new disease-modifying treatments in the next 3 months or in the first quarter of next year. And we wanted to understand, is your country even looking at what that means for your country? Are you thinking of having a working group at a national level? Is there some kind of strategy in place to make sure that once the EMA authorizes these medicines for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, are countries ready? And is your country thinking of what they need to do to make sure that people can access these medicines? And you can see only very, very, very few countries have such a strategy or working group in place to look at these innovative treatments that might come to the market, and only Sweden, Slovakia, Greece, England, and Ireland are the only countries that are seriously sitting down at a governmental level to study what does this mean for our country and how can we prepare for the advent of these medicines. And all the other countries, there's currently no effort in that field. So when we then look at the overall score of countries when it comes to the question of treatment and medical interventions, you can see that Sweden, Ireland, and the whole of the UK, both England and Scotland, are the countries that are leading the way. Something that is also interesting here to see is, for example, the position of France, which 6 years ago would have ranked much higher, but which is one of the very few countries that suddenly decided that the access to the current treatments for Alzheimer's disease would no longer be reimbursed. So 6 years ago, France had a much higher score, a much better score, but it's because France actually limited the access of people with Alzheimer's disease to these treatments that are almost available in most other European countries. You can also see, however, that countries again like the Ukraine, Armenia, Bulgaria, and North Macedonia are those countries where there's the fewest support available for all of these treatments and medical interventions. Again, for each one of these, you can look at the publication to really see how your country is comparing to other countries. The next area we looked at was clinical trials. So here we looked at phase 3 clinical trials that were conducted in 2023 or 2022 and were actively recruiting patients either in any European country. We looked at 10 different clinical trials. I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically just have a look at that. Again, the details are in your publication. So we looked at 10 clinical trials, opportunities for people with Alzheimer's disease to participate in trials that are looking into potentially disease-modifying treatment, hopefully a cure, a delay, and how many of these were actually available in European countries. So none of these countries had availability and access to all 10 of these clinical trials. The country that scored best was France, where 8 of these 10 of these clinical trials were available. That was followed then by Spain, the Netherlands, and the UK, both against Scotland and England. So these were the countries that were really leading when it comes to clinical research in the field of Alzheimer's disease. You can see a lot of blue on this map, so a lot of European countries where there's only access maybe to 1 or 2 clinical trials. But we also have a series of countries, especially smaller countries like Luxembourg, like Malta, North Macedonia, Serbia, or even Iceland, where there's currently no clinical trial available for people to take part. So something that you would expect. If you have a cancer diagnosis, you would hope to get access to very high degree treatment. And if your cancer is not as treatable as you would have hoped for, you would want to have access to innovative clinical trials. That's something that is very often absent in Europe and in some countries, again, Luxembourg, Malta, smaller countries, none of these clinical trials are available to people with Alzheimer's disease. Also, Armenia and Israel would also be countries where that would be the case. Then another area that we looked at was the involvement of the country in European dementia research, collaborations. The collaboration that is probably best known for most of you are the Joint Program for Neurodegenerative Diseases, the JPND program. In the past, we also looked, for example, at joint actions and which countries were participating in joint actions. But since we only looked at the past 3 years, we currently were not able to look at that aspect for this edition of the European Dementia Monitor. But then there's the joint program. Is the country participating? But also on an annual basis, the JPND publishes calls. And is the country participating in the calls? And are there opportunities for researchers from these countries to participate in these fantastic research opportunities? Here again, a very clear East-West divide, and it will be something that will come back again and again in most of these kind of slides. You see that most of the Western European countries, where they are highly participative, they are members of the JPND, they are very active in supporting research calls, but there's countries, for example, like Iceland, Armenia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, where there's no preparedness from the country to be involved in these European research collaborations. Also, for example, you have the UK. This is not an EU program, but for example, if you had looked at this 4 years ago, the UK was actually a very active member of the JPND and was very actively contributing to a lot of these research collaborations and was very active collaborating with other European countries. So this is a program that's open to countries like Canada, there's countries like Australia, Israel is a member of this. So there's no stopping, for example, the UK in being an active member of the JPND. They were very active prior to Brexit. Brexit had no implications to their involvement in the JPND because it's not an EU program, but you can see that this is an area where UK has really regressed because there's less willingness of the country to engage in these European research collaborations, whereas countries that are incredibly active in that are the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Italy, Germany, Norway, and Sweden, because they are very active members of the JPND and also are very happy in contributing funding to these great calls and projects. The next area was dementia as a priority. So here we looked at, is there a national dementia strategy in your country? Has there ever been a strategy in your country? Because in some countries, they had a fantastic plan. For example, France had the most amazing, ambitious Alzheimer's plan for a number of years that came to an end, that was replaced by neurodegenerative diseases plan, and is now a kind of platform, a kind of declaration of intent, but the strategy has disappeared, whereas other countries have new dementia strategies in place, or other countries that are already developing their third or fourth edition of the same strategy. So these were the questions that we asked here. Or is there a national strategy? Is it still ongoing? Are there regional strategies in place? For example, Italy or Spain have also strategies at a local level. Then the question is there funding for these strategies? Is there regular monitoring for these strategies? Or is there at least a government official in your country that is responsible for dementia policies and strategies? We also asked, Alzheimer Europe has set up a European group of governmental experts on dementia. We asked, well, is your country involved in such a collaboration? WHO has published its Global Dementia Observatory, which invited all countries to contribute data at a global level. So we wanted to understand, has your country contributed to that WHO exercise? Then a new area is brain health. Does your country have a brain health strategy? Is dementia recognized as a national research priority? And importantly for us as well, does the national organization receive funding from the government, either for its core activities or for some of its projects? When you look at the map, a very regular feature, yet again, it is a kind of east-west divide, and the countries, again, Nordic countries, will be much more active in this kind of field of having dementia recognized as a strategy. Also, some of the more Central European countries, but Italy, Greece are also countries where they have a strategy and where there's really a growing recognition of dementia as a priority. You see the whole of Southeastern Europe, which is very, very dark blue, where there's currently no willingness of the government to develop a strategy. There's very little funding for the Alzheimer's organization. So again, a very mixed picture when it comes to the ranking of countries on the recognition of dementia as a priority. Another area that we looked at was inclusiveness and dementia friendliness of these countries. So we want to understand, does the country have a national working group of people with dementia? Is there a national working group of carers? Dementia Friends programs is a very popular program that works in a lot of countries. Is dementia recognized as a disability? Is the Alzheimer's Association a member of the Disability Federation? And then we also ask questions around dementia inclusive or dementia friendly initiatives. How far are they developed in your country? Are they fully developed and really recognized throughout the country? Are there some local projects or pilot projects so that this is a concept that's more in development, or is this a concept that's actually absent? So when it comes to dementia inclusive communities, those countries that really feel that these are fully developed and are the UK, both Scotland and England, Norway, and also the Netherlands, where this concept of dementia-friendly initiatives is really very well developed. And then you have a number of countries where this is not really developed throughout the country. Again, you see a whole range of countries which are in light green, where the concept is there, but they're not quite as developed as the kind of leading countries. You also see an awful lot of countries in very dark blue, which means this is a concept that doesn't exist in the country. There's no efforts being made to support dementia-friendly initiatives. And these are really very useful initiatives because it allows people with dementia to stay within their communities for much longer, to be respected members of their societies, of their communities. And so it's a real shame that this is a concept that is not developed as much as it should. And you also see here some outliers in Western Europe. You see, for example, Portugal, France, and Luxembourg, where these are concepts that are not really developed at this stage. So when we look at the overall picture on ranking of countries in dementia inclusiveness, the one country that is highest on this list is the UK. Again, both England and Scotland that I think had a perfect score of 100% on this field. But again, countries like Luxembourg, France, Portugal score 0% in Western Europe, but you also have countries like Poland, Hungary, Romania, Serbia, and North Macedonia, and also Armenia, where this is a concept that is just not used, and where there's very few initiatives in this field. The eighth area that we looked at, so we are at 8, so there's not too many areas still to go. We are getting closer to 10. So these are legal issues. These are some of the recommendations that we have made as an organization, which we would like national countries to abide by. We want them to have a legal framework for advanced directives. We want this supported decision-making to be enshrined in national legislations. We want there to be legal mechanisms so that somebody can appoint or have appointed a healthcare proxy. So if they're no longer able to make decisions for themselves, that they have somebody that can support them in making these healthcare decisions, or that they have somebody that can support them in making financial decisions. And then a last area, and again, with the European Parliament elections coming up, we don't think that a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease should ever disbar somebody from being able to participate in elections. So that's also a principle of the European Disability Forum and other organizations. So we hope that organizations and countries apply by these 5 principles. And here a very positive map, because you can see that there's an awful lot of dark green. So a lot of countries actually fulfill all 5 of these criteria. So this is really an area where we have moved in the right direction, because 3 years and 6 years ago, that was not the case. And here you can really see the consequences of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, because that convention has forced a whole range of countries to adapt their legislation to make sure that they are much more disability friendly, and by extent more dementia friendly than they were. But unfortunately, we also have countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and North Macedonia, where none of these are currently really being implemented. And also Israel is also one of those countries, as you can see, where all of these rights are fully recognized. The second last of the areas that we looked at are international and European treaties. I already mentioned the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, the UNCRPD. That's optional protocol. There's the Hague Convention for the Protection of Vulnerable Adults, which basically is a system which allows a person under guardianship, or a person that has somebody that is supposed to be their supported decision maker, that decision will be recognized once they travel to another country that has also ratified this Hague Convention. And then there's the Council of Europe Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine. So again, we looked at countries, have they at least signed it? So that's an interest in joining this treaty, or have they actually ratified the treaty? So here you have some countries, so Finland, Estonia, the Czech Republic, France, Portugal, Greece, and Cyprus, that have ratified all of these conventions. You can see that some countries like Ireland and Bulgaria are actually lagging behind, because, for example, Ireland hasn't, it was for a long time the only country that in the EU that hadn't ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So that has now happened. So that's great to see. But the optional protocol, for example, has still not been ratified by Ireland. So that could be an area where there's potential for improvement in that country. And then the last area that we looked at was all the issues around carer and employment support. So one of the issues, is there a framework that allows people that have been diagnosed with dementia to potentially stay within their jobs, as you would be able to do if you have another diagnosis of another disease, or if you have a disability? Are countries supposed to do reasonable accommodation for people that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or dementia in employment? Is there some degree of carers allowance in the country? Is there a right for workers that are carers to have paid leave, to have flexible working hours, or to have unpaid leave when they are forced to care for somebody with Alzheimer's disease. So again, this is the map for this field. You can see that a lot of the Central European countries, all of these rights are actually recognized, but you also have countries here like Ukraine, Armenia, or Cyprus, where that is not the case. And again, it's a very mixed picture when it comes to all of these rights and how far and how progressive, or not progressive, but how supportive of people with dementia some of these national legislations are. So looking at all of this, what kind of national ranking are we able to get once we are adding up these 10 areas and coming up to a final score? So the Netherlands came first, followed by Scotland, but yeah, not the whole UK, but specifically Scotland and the Czech Republic. Those were the kind of 3 countries that were actually top of our ranking system of European countries. France was actually the country that scored highest in 4 of the categories that we've been mentioned, which was followed by the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, and the UK, each of them ranking highest in 3 of those categories. And then you had countries like Northern Macedonia, Bulgaria, Romania, and the Ukraine that very clearly needed to make the most progress and potential reforms to improve the dementia-friendly policies in their countries. On the whole, Northern, Western, and Central European countries were doing better and consistently so than some of the more Eastern European countries. We also looked at how countries changed over the last 3 years. So 18 countries were actually able to improve their overall percentage score, and 11 countries actually have regressed since the last time we made this exercise. But no country is perfect. No country is scoring 100%. So all countries need to make additional efforts to make sure to improve the people with dementia and their carers. So here's the whole ranking system. You can see again, the Netherlands with 77.6%. So that's still 3/4 of the recommendations that we would like to see accepted by governments is happening in the Netherlands. But you then also see that a whole range of countries are just scoring slightly above 50%, but a country like Northern Macedonia is only at 16%. So very significant efforts that would need to be made by that country and also other countries when it comes to the situation of people with dementia. And this is the overall map. So that's the last map that I'm going to show you. Again, it's a very clear East-West divide. Those countries that are scoring best, as I've mentioned before, are countries in Northern Europe, in Central Europe. Italy is also doing very well in this area, whereas you have countries, especially in Southeastern Europe, which are really lagging behind compared to other European countries. So what I've been telling you is these are all the differences between countries, but differences often very exist as well within countries. So you may have access to fantastic services in the capital, but in rural areas, that situation might be very different. There might also be very significant differences when it comes to access to people from the majority populations in our European countries, whereas minority ethnic groups, people from the LGBTQ plus community will have very different experiences of access, affordability. There's also gender differences that would be very important. So our call, of course, is that we would like every country to have a dementia action plan. We want countries to systematically exchange good practices. This is a really good exercise. Look at how your country compares to others. Look at the areas where your country should really improve, and go to the country that might be the leader in this field and see, well, how can we learn from you to make sure that we can improve the situation in our field? But I think all of this is not possible unless we make sure that we fully integrate and listen to people with lived experience. Both people with dementia and carers need to be central to any such efforts that we're going to make. We also would like to have a more human rights approach for all of these policies to underlie the development of reforms and dementia strategies. And we have an absolutely fantastic opportunity coming up very soon. We will have European Parliament elections, and I think that's going to be a fantastic opportunity for us to again raise the profile of Alzheimer's disease, highlight these very significant differences that exist between European countries, and really issue a very strong call for change, reform in all of these areas that I've just mentioned. And with that, you have a file in front of you, but if you want to download and share this report, please feel free. This is the QR code that you can use to download it. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.